Hello, everyone, tonight, and welcome. My name is Glenn Rawson, and I'm coming to you from my hotel room in London. My, uh, my group, we just finished our tour today at the British Museum, and you can tell we're getting down to the end of the tour because we're all tired and footsore and ready to go home. We fly out in the morning and come back to the States. So, anyway, this is coming to you from London. Just a couple of things. I'll introduce the topic in just a moment, but I wanted to remind you this coming January, I'm going to be taking a group on a church history trip of Oahu in Hawaii. Now, think about it. January, February, cold, inversions in Salt Lake. And just imagine getting on a flight, going to Hawaii, not only having time to enjoy the beach and relax and enjoy the warm weather, but traveling around and seeing the sights and enjoying Pearl Harbor and church history sites all over the island. It's going to be a great tour. Now, if you can't come, I understand. I'll bring the tour to you. But if you can come and would like to get away, well, go to glennrawsonstories.com glennrawsonstories.com or reach out to Suzanne and she can sign you up. Either way, give me a call, send me a text, send me an email, and I'll forward it on to Suzanne. I'd love to have you. Also coming out from Glenn Rawson Stories, the new book, Prayer Brings Miracles. Well, it's on its way, and it'll be here soon. Stories of prayer that I think all of you will be able to relate to, no matter what religion you come from. And the Year 6 collection, that book will also be here soon. So, may I ask for an interest in your faith and prayers tonight? And let me introduce the topic kind of in a roundabout way. The stories I'm going to share with you tonight are hard stories to hear. They're not happy stories. And you're going to wonder, you know, what's addled in my brain that I'm sharing these kinds of stories with you tonight. But I've just spent a month over here in England. And, I learned today that the origins of this land are England is Angle Land or Angels Land. Interesting name, Angels Land. While I've been traveling from place to place with my groups, studying, learning, and teaching, a theme, a common thread ran through the history of the British Isles. And tonight, I want to share with you 4 stories and how those stories have changed the life of every American. And you'll wonder why, but I'll tie it up all together at the end. So please have a prayer in your heart that all of this goes well. We begin with this first story. June 28th, 1491. Henry VII and his wife, Elizabeth of York, they have a son at Greenwich Palace here in London. He was described as a cute, cuddly little boy with creamy skin and red hair and blue eyes. He had to have red hair. And his father saw to his education. They called him Henry, but they nicknamed him Harry. And Harry grew up as a natural-born prince. According to some accounts, he mastered the longbow, was a gifted musician, and at a very early age he could speak and write Latin, Greek, and French, as well as English. But he was not the crown prince. He was not the heir to the throne. He had an older brother by the name of Arthur. So Henry was not in line for the throne. His father had come to the throne after defeating Richard III of the House of York. That was the 30 Years' War, the Battle of the Roses, the War of the Roses, rather. And Henry VII had taken the throne from the House of York. Some considered him a usurper and not worthy of the crown. So Henry VII had something to prove. and for all intents and purposes, he was a careful king, ruled his subjects, established a great treasury. Now, in November of 1501, Henry's older brother, Arthur, married Catherine of Aragon. They were both only 16 years of age. And then, as it would happen, both Catherine and Arthur got sick, and Arthur passed away. Henry was now the heir apparent for the throne. He is only about 10 years of age. In 1503, Henry VII and his wife, desperate for another son, she dies in childbirth. And now, with the death of his brother and the death of his mother, Henry's father guarded him carefully, saw to his tutoring. Henry VIII would become a virtual prisoner in his own home. He is the heir to the throne. He must live. In June of 1505, Henry VII made his son swear that he would not marry Catherine of Aragon. He had no fondness for her, but Henry adored her. In April of 1509, Henry VII died after a long, hard battle with disease. And in June of 1509, Henry is crowned the King of England. He is 17 years old. Contemporaries at the time said, quote, "Heaven and earth rejoices. Our king is not after gold or gems or precious metals, but virtue, glory, and immortality." End of quote. And perhaps as a sign of things to come, Henry immediately executed his father's two top advisors and then began to play and spend like the prodigal son. He spent very little time on affairs of state, preferring instead to throw these elaborate, famous parties. And of course, what do you want most but that which you can't have? On the 11th of June, now as the King of England, or soon to be, Henry married Catherine of Aragon. She's 23 years old. She's considered too old to be starting a family. But it is said Henry desired her above all women. He loved her and longed to wed her. And maybe Henry wasn't such a bad catch after all. After all, he is the King of England. But when he took the throne, some say they described him as follows: 6'3" tall, all muscle and brawn, with intelligent blue eyes and a ready smile. He had a warm and gracious personality. One ambassador described Henry as, quote, "His Majesty is the handsomest leader I ever set eyes on," end of quote. In August of 1513, hungry for military prowess, every king had to earn his place, Henry attacked France, leading his men into battle. Not only does he win, he takes a large area of France, defeats the King of the Scots in subsequent battles, and Henry returns home with honor and glory, reveling in his new nickname, Great Harry. February 1516. After 4 failed pregnancies, Catherine of Aragon finally gives birth. It's a girl. They name her Mary. In June of 1520, Henry and Francis, the King of France, meet on a field in what came to be called the Field of the Cloth of Gold, because of the fine clothing of all who attended. The two kings made a great show of affection and formed an alliance against Charles of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1521, another irony, Henry writes a book attacking the Protestant Reformation going on the continent, and particularly he attacks Martin Luther, calling Luther a weed and an evil-minded sheep. And for this valiant defense of the faith, Henry was given the title Defender of the Faith. Then in 1826, Henry falls in love with Anne Boleyn. She is a courtier for the Queen. Well, it is said that she turned down Henry's invitation to become his mistress. Some see it differently. But either way, Henry wanted to marry her. He began a search for a way to get out of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Well, he applied for a divorce. You know this story. The movie tells all about it. But the Pope can't grant that divorce, not only because it's against the policies of the Catholic Church, but also because Catherine is related to Charles of the Holy Roman Empire, and that would offend Charles. So, no divorce. So, in February of 1531, and again, I'm oversimplifying it, but you know the history, Henry appealed to Parliament and asked Parliament to make him the sole protector and supreme head of the church in England. Parliament complied. When he was warned that he would be excommunicated, Henry replied about the Pope, "I care not a fig for his excommunication." And Henry did it. Parliament declared him the head of the church. Henry immediately put out the decree across the realm that his subjects, must swear allegiance to him as the head of the church. Think about what that means. In January of 1533, he married Anne Boleyn. Thomas Cranmer, the newly appointed archbishop, declares the marriage to Catherine null and void, and the marriage to Anne is legal, and Henry has what he wants. In September of 1533, Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, a second daughter, and Europe mocks Henry, who so wants a son. In the summer of 1535, Henry has two prominent clerics executed, Thomas More and John Fisher. And why did he execute them? Because they refused to bow to Henry's law of loyalty to him as the head of the church. You will believe that I am the head of the church. You will support me as the leader, or you die. They chose death. And because of that, all of Europe, Catholic and Protestant alike, all are shocked at Henry's audacity. In May of 1536, and I was just there today, Anne Boleyn is brought before a crowd at the Tower of London, Tower Green, and she is accused of seducing 5 men, including her own brother, and she is summarily executed, not before she is forced to watch the execution of the 5 men she is charged with seducing. The charges are trumped up. They are an excuse to get rid of her. In January of 1536, Catherine of Aragon dies. But in her last years, Catherine of Aragon and her daughter, Mary, are forced apart. And Mary is forced to accept Henry's decree that all of England is now Protestant. And she is forced, at the threat of her life, to renounce Catholicism. And she would resent Henry all his days. 1, for forcing her apart from her mother, and 2, for forcing her conscience to accept a doctrine she did not agree with. In May of 1536, Henry married Jane Seymour, and she was a good wife to him. According to the accounts, she finally is the one who gave Henry an heir, Edward. Also in 1536, Henry did something remarkable. He had now, as it were, depleted the treasury bequeathed to him by his father, and now he's broke and he needs money. The richest entity across the realm is the Catholic Church. There are 500 and some monasteries in England, 130 nunneries, and an annual wealth in the hundreds of thousands of pounds, more money than the king made year by year. So, Henry nationalized the lands of the Catholic Church, took all that they had and sold or leased the land. Then he gutted the monasteries and the nunneries, took all the gold and silver in the buildings, even the lead off the roof and the stone off the walls. He sacked those buildings and left them in ruins that you can see down to the present day. Well, in October of 1537, Jane died of infection and Henry was distraught. Yesterday we were at Windsor Castle, where we could see the grave of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. In 1540, Henry was duped by an exaggerated painting of Anne of Cleves from Germany, and he agrees to marry her. But when she crosses the channel and he sees her, he is so angry at being deceived, she doesn't look at all like the painting, that he despises her. But he has no choice but to carry out the marriage, but he can't stand her. So he asks Parliament to annul the marriage, and of course they do. She realizes what's going on and what she reads the room, as it were, and she graciously bows out, refers to herself as his sister, and for that he rewards her richly for her cooperation. July 28, 1540, Henry marries Catherine Howard. She's 15. He's 49. No longer the wonderful catch he once was. He is described, and I quote, by contemporaries, so fat that such a man had never been seen. And again, 3 of the biggest men who could be found could get inside his jacket. She's 15. And he is a 49-year-old, grumpy, sick, ornery old fat man. February 13th, 1542, less than 2 years later, Catherine is accused of having an affair. She, the 16-year-old queen now, is brought to the Tower Green and executed and buried near Anne Boleyn in the Tower of London. Lastly, July 12th, 1542, Henry forces Catherine Parr to marry him. She's been twice widowed already. She's a gentle and a good, kindly woman with the capacity and the ability to nurse old men. She encourages Henry's reconciliation with his children. And then lastly, on the 28th of January, 1547, Henry VIII passed away. Now, I don't look at this from the vantage point of God. I can't. I don't know how to judge all matters. But Henry's break with the Catholic Church has been an issue that's been argued about ever since Henry made that decision. My purpose here is not to say whether Henry did a good thing or a bad thing. That's none of my business. But what it effectively did is divided the English-speaking peoples between Protestant and Catholic. And that too is not necessarily a bad thing. But consider this. Please just consider this story. Henry died in 1547, and his son, Edward, who was just a lad, I think he's 9 or 10 years old himself, ascends to the throne, and he is advised by regents, those who are close with him, and Edward continues the tradition of his father that England is a Protestant nation. Then, Edward, at the age of 15, dies, it is believed, of tuberculosis. And the last thing he willed was that his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, a pious young teenage girl, a Protestant, be appointed queen. She's of the right blood. But the problem is that Edward's older sister, Mary, is the oldest, and she's Catholic. And that's why Edward doesn't want her in his will to succeed to the throne. She's Catholic, and Edward's Protestant. So Lady Jane Grey, to make a long story short, Edward dies, Lady Jane Grey ascends to the throne. But when word reaches Mary, she gathers up the forces of England, and she's the direct daughter of the king. She's, for whatever reason, England sides with Mary, and Mary ascends to the throne. To make a long story short and condensed, in time, at first Mary saw no threat in Jane Grey, her distant teenage cousin. But then after a plot was hatched to overthrow Mary, she came to see Jane Grey as a threat. And so, Lady Jane Grey, just a girl of 16 or 17, is once again brought to the Tower Green, where she proclaims she never asked to be queen. It was thrust upon her by power-hungry, manipulative men. She is beheaded on the Tower Green and buried in St. Peter's Advincula there on Tower Hill. She's murdered just because she's Protestant and Mary is Catholic. Mary would go on a rampage after that, determined that she would bring England back to Catholicism. Two of Edward's advisors were Bishops Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer. Both of these men were called to account for their Protestant beliefs. They were called to Oxford, where they were examined, and both men had been powerful preachers and defenders of the Protestant religion. They had advised Edward. They had steered England toward Protestantism. But then when Mary assumed the throne, both men were brought to hold an account for their Protestant beliefs, and they were offered the chance to recant, and both men, as a matter of conscience, refused. In fact, Ridley said, "My conscience assureth me that my doctrine was sound and according to God's word, which doctrine, the Lord being my helper, I will maintain so long as my tongue shall wag and breath is in my body, and in confirmation thereof seal the same with my blood." Ridley was condemned to die by burning at the stake. His contemporary, Hugh Latimer, similarly refused to recant, and he too was condemned to die. On his last days in prison, Latimer, it is said, spent hours in prayer. There were three principal matters that he prayed for. First, that God would give him grace to stand for his doctrine until death, that he might give his heart's blood for the same, and secondly, that God would restore his gospel, Protestantism, to England once again. And the third matter was to pray for the preservation of the queen that now is, the queen that was ordering his execution. As they were led out to the place of execution, right in front of Balliol College, on the streets at Oxford, Ridley saw Latimer, and he ran to him, and he embraced him, and he kissed him, saying, "Be of good cheer, brother, for God will either assuage the fury of the flame or strengthen us to abide it." And with that, he ran to the stake and knelt down before it. As he was being tied to the stake, Ridley prayed, "O Heavenly Father, I give unto thee most hearty thanks that thou hast called me to be a professor of thee even unto death. I beseech thee, Lord God, have mercy on this realm of England and deliver it from all her enemies. Ridley's last words would prove to be prophetic. He said, Latimer's last words would prove to be prophetic. He said to Ridley, "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, and play the man. For this day we shall light such a candle in England as I trust by God's grace shall never be put out." And then the men were tied to the stake. Ridley's brother came forward, tied sacks of gunpowder around the necks of both men. The wood caught under Latimer, burned quickly, and the gunpowder ignited, and Latimer was gone quickly. But Ridley, according to some, the wood was green, and it burned slow, and he perished slowly and painfully. Both men died martyrs to their faith. Some 450 years after that event, I was walking Broad Street in Oxford, and as I walked along the street, I looked down, and there was an interruption in the pavement, a circle in the pavement, and beneath it, cobblestones, and etched into the cobblestones was a cross. And I stopped and I looked and I thought, what is this? And then I noticed a plaque on the wall right next to me, which explained the death of the two men. And somehow I felt that I was standing on holy ground, the spot where two men died for their conscience. I may not agree with Latimer and Ridley and their Protestantism. I may not agree with the next story I'm going to tell you about her Catholicism. I don't have to. But there is something innate within me that rebels at the state, the power of the state, telling me what I can believe, what I can't believe, and how I must worship. It seems inherently wrong. Let's take a break. I need to plug my computer in anyway, as soon as I can figure out what I did with my cord. You'd think I'd figure out that this thing goes dead very quickly. Okay, I think that's got it. There we go. Trying to turn a little bit of light on so it's not so dark. All right, now for a break for just a second. Guys, I was just told by Fun for Less that next September I'm going on a tour in celebration of America 250. We're going to go from Boston to Jamestown. And they told me just a few days ago that there's already 25 people signed up for that tour, and they haven't even advertised it yet. It's going to be a very popular tour, I think. Michael Wilcox is taking a group, him and Jeff Lawson, earlier in the summer, and I'm taking one in the fall. So I guess I'm trying to say, that if you would like to go deep into American history and the founding of America, call Fun for Less and come with me if you can. We're going to go see the founding of America where it happened. Call Fun for Less Tours. And one more time, thank you to all of you who listen to these stories and share them with someone else. I am very grateful. Next story. Margaret Clitheroe was born Margaret Middleton in 1556 in York, England. Her father was a respected sheriff of York, and a prominent citizen. Margaret was well known for her generous and kind nature. She was described as a woman of good cheer, a beautiful young woman with a mass of light brown hair, clear skin, a cheerful nature, and an irrepressible sense of humor. In 1558, now mind you, she was born in 1556. In 1558, after the death of Queen Mary, who also came to be known as Bloody Mary, I told you about her, because it is said that she executed in her 5-year reign 293 Protestants because they didn't believe the way she liked. Then in 1558, England came under the reign of Queen Elizabeth, also the daughter of Henry VIII, and she decreed that England was now Protestant. The monarch says, this is how you'll worship and this is what you believe or else. And so in 1558, England now goes back the other way to Protestantism. Well, in 1571, Margaret married John Clitheroe. He was a butcher and a chamberlain of the city, a prominent citizen, and together they had 3 children. Today you can go to Margaret Clitheroe's home. When Margaret married John, they had a happy life. But shortly after, Margaret converted to Roman Catholicism. I don't know the details of all the reasons why, but she became a Catholic. Now, her husband was an Anglican, a member of the Church of England, a Protestant. He didn't join Catholicism with her, but he did support her. Well, as it turns out, and again, I'm really condensing the story, there's a lot more to it, but Margaret was imprisoned 3 times for not going to church. She was fined on a regular basis because she didn't attend church, and her husband dutifully paid those fines. In fact, she went to prison so many times for not going to church, her third child, William, was born in prison. Now, if that's not enough, it was also against the law to celebrate the Mass in England, and it was against the law to support or aid or assist Catholic priests. How much against the law was it? It was a capital offense. You could be killed for that. Nevertheless, the cheerful and devout Margaret hid and supported the priests and secretly helped them carry out services for the Catholics. And then one day, in March of 1586, Margaret's house was searched. Someone turned her in, I guess. And a frightened boy revealed the priest's hole. There was a trap door of some sort hiding the priests, and this secret entrance was discovered. The priests were found, and Margaret was arrested. She was called before the authorities, where she refused to plead, thus preventing a trial. Why would she do that? Because she knew if there was a trial, her children would be called to testify and likely subjected to torture. By refusing to plead, she was automatically guilty. And so what was the offense? Death. They took Margaret, even though she was expecting her 4th child, and they brought her up onto the toll booth bridge over the river Ouse. They stripped off her clothes, put a rock down on the ground, and laid Margaret on that ground with that rock sticking up into her back. Then they took the door off her house, laid it on top of her, and piled on rocks one at a time. And it is said when the rocks reached 800 pounds, The rock in her back crushed her spine, and she died within 15 minutes. They left her body there for 6 hours on display as a warning to everyone else. Then it is said that the city authorities took her body and buried it in a waste ground, a dump. Catholics later went out, found her body, and dug it up. After carefully embalming her, they secretly buried her, and Margaret Clitheroe's grave was so carefully guarded that now the location is lost. Before they buried her, they took off one of her hands, which is now a precious treasure and a relic in the Bar Convent in York. Margaret Clitheroe, young mother, murdered for the sake of conscience. In the aftermath, Queen Elizabeth herself said to the people of York, "That was wrong. You shouldn't have done that." Margaret's daughter was arrested and forced to go to the Anglican Church, but she refused. She ran away, and eventually she made her way to France, and she became a nun in honor of her mother. Both of Margaret's sons abandoned the Protestant religion, and both of them became Catholic priests. In 1929, Margaret Clitheroe was beatified, and then in October of 1970, she was canonized as a saint and classed among the 40 martyrs of religion in England and Wales. Today, and just a week or so ago, I was in York with my people. We walked down the shambles, and we turned into number 35 and number 36, the shrine to St. Margaret. I don't agree with Margaret's doctrine. I don't have to. But there is something inherently wrong in the divine plan and the divine scheme of things that kills someone because they don't believe the way you want them to. There was more stories I was going to share, but I think enough is enough. This one might be sufficient to end it. His name was Thomas Aikenhead. His father was a prominent citizen, city leader in Edinburgh. His maternal grandfather was a clergyman. And Thomas was a student at the University of Edinburgh. This is approximately 1676, 1680. No, actually, it was in the 1690s that Thomas was now matured and a student at Edinburgh University. And again, all of the historical facts are not known, but it appears that while a student at the University of Edinburgh, Thomas became involved in discussions over religion. And he contested the religion of his day. He didn't believe what he was being taught. He was a seeker. He wanted truth. And so, of course, like any university student would, not being long on knowledge and sometimes not common sense, he was very verbally outspoken against the church and its doctrine. And consequently, in December of 1696, he was arrested. And the indictment read as follows. Get this. You are indicted and accused by the crime of blasphemy against God or any of the persons of the Blessed Trinity or against the Holy Scriptures of our holy religion. Blasphemy is a crime of the highest nature and ought to be severely punished. He'd asked a bunch of questions. He'd said he didn't believe. The indictment further went on to say, no counsel appeared for the prisoner, nor does it seem that one word was urged upon his behalf during the course of the trial. In fact, the closest friends that Achan had discussed religion with are the ones who turned him in and testified against him at the trial. Now, had anyone been there to defend him, they might have said that his words were rash words, spoken in the heat of controversy, which by no means coincided with his serious notions, and that he heartily repented. Once he was arrested, Achan had woke up and realized the seriousness of his situation. But it didn't happen that way. He was found guilty of blasphemy. The prosecutor summarized the evidence as follows, quote, "You, Thomas Aikenhead, shaking off all fear of God and His Majesty's laws, have now for more than 12 months made it your endeavor to vent your wicked blasphemies against God and our Savior Jesus Christ, Holy Scriptures, and all religion. You say that divinity or the doctrine of theology was a rhapsody of feigned and ill-invented nonsense, patched up partly of the moral doctrine of philosophers and partly of poetical fictions and extravagant chimeras." And then he goes on and he says that you, Aikenhead, you denounced the Scriptures, you denounced the divinity of Christ, you said you denounced the prophets of the Old Testament, particularly Moses, and you denounced the doctrine of the Trinity. And then the prosecutor asserts that you, Aikenhead, deserve to be punished by death as an example to all and to instill terror in others who may blaspheme. Well, the case was prosecuted. Aikenhead was declared guilty. December 24th, 1696, the jury found Aikenhead guilty of cursing and railing against God, denying the Incarnation and the Trinity, and scoffing at the Scriptures, in summary. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Now, why was this extraordinary, even for the time? Because the statute, the law, called for such execution only upon the third conviction for the offense. First-time offenders were not to be punished so severely. Aikenhead defended himself and in the end said, "It's not really what I believe. It is not my innate belief, the things I'm accused of." Aikenhead was repentant. Well, the civil authorities said, "We won't execute you." On the 7th of January, after another petition, the Privy Council, the civic authorities, ruled that they would not grant a reprieve to Aikenhead unless the church interceded for him. In other words, we'll execute you. If the church intercedes, we'll let you go. We'll leave it up to the church. The Church of Scotland's General Assembly, sitting in Edinburgh at the time, I'm quoting, urged, quote, vigorous execution to curb the abounding of impiety and profanity in this land. Aikenhead's sentence was confirmed. On the morning of January 8, 1697, Aikenhead wrote to his friends and parents, pointing out that his parents were dear and worthy friends. And then he said, "I desire you may call for extracts of my petitions to the council and judiciary, which I relate to in my last speech, which I recommend to your care, that I may be vindicated from any false aspersions." He was accused of many more things of which he was not guilty. He was said to have died by hanging with a Bible in his hands, with all the marks of a true penitent. One British historian of the 19th century, Thomas Babington Macaulay, said this of Aikenhead's death: "The preachers who were there, who were the poor boy's murderers, crowded round him at the gallows, and while he was struggling in the last act of agony, the preachers insulted heaven with prayers more blasphemous than anything Aikenhead had uttered." Thomas Aikenhead, that killing for conscience sake, shocked again Britain. Aikenhead would be the last person hanged for blasphemy in Great Britain, but it still remained a capital offense until 1825. Now, my dear friends, these are not happy stories, but sometimes it is necessary, and I feel compelled to do so, to relate a heavy story to make a very important point. I don't care whether you go all the way back to Henry VIII, the reign of Edward, the reign of Bloody Mary, the reign of Elizabeth, or all the way up until you come to 1921 and forward in Ireland and the troubles of Ireland between Protestants and Catholics, and that trouble is down to the present day, and those walls between Catholics and Protestants are all over Belfast. Too many people have been murdered for the sake of conscience because they did not believe the way someone wanted them to. They didn't worship in a manner that civil authorities wanted them to. Hence, my dear friends, the point why I told you these stories. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Church and state are separate and should be.